My name is Themba Muchaneta, and I am an MBA student at LBS, class of 2021. I am also the president of the LBS Africa Club, and I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I'd like to introduce Professor Elias, who is an economics professor here at London Business School. So hello to you, Elias. Tell me a bit about your research and what your main research interests are.
Thank you, Themba. So over the past decade, I would say, together with my colleague Stellos Michalopoulous at Brown University, we have been working on various aspects of African development. Initially, our focus was on the colonial and pre-colonial origins, examining, for example, the impact of the artificial border design or the impact of ethnic-specific features related to political centralization. But more recently, we have been trying to understand inertia, persistence that tend to characterize and define development in the continent. And to be even more specific, over the past couple of years, we have been working again together with Stellos Michalopoulous, Sebastian Hohmann, Alberto Alesina, and Torsten Walter, trying to understand the expansion of education, trying to understand inertia in educational intergenerational mobility. First, we want to map the expansion of schooling infrastructure across more than 25 or more African countries since independence. So effectively, we want to provide to the research community, to policymakers, to business school students, to the general public, a detailed dynamic mapping that will record where schools, for example, were built in Zimbabwe, starting sometime in the early 60s, going over till the most recent period. So we have already completed the mapping of school construction for at least 15 countries so far. And we are quite optimistic that in the past couple of months, we'll be able to have at least, as I mentioned before, 25 to 30 countries. Now, second, with the new data handy, where we will know the exact location of, let's say, a new school in Mozambique or in Malawi or in Ghana, we will link this with educational attainment of boys and girls who were born and grew up in those regions during the relevant period. And this will allow us to assess what is the impact of school construction programs. Third, we want to further understand what's happening here. So we'll try to assess which exactly policies are successful in increasing the supply of schools. And fourth, we will try to examine whether there are complementarities of school construction with other infrastructure. And this, we believe, is quite important for policy making. So one concrete test that we plan to implement is, for example, do schools have a bigger effect in areas, for example, that are connected to the transportation network system? Are schools more effective when those programs take place close to the capitals or in areas where they are more specializing, relatively speaking, in services and manufacturing? This, we believe, is going to be quite important to shed light on poverty trap dynamics, which have defined policy making in Africa going to the late colonization period. So initially, our research was mostly on the adverse effects of colonization and the pre-colonial features. Now we move more to the contemporary issues where policies are in the hands of Africans, to put it this way, and see how they can move their countries, their regions forward.
Interesting perspectives. To what extent does your research take into consideration some of the things, and I know you've touched on this, I just want, I guess, to dig a little bit deeper there. But yes, to what extent does your research take into consideration the nuances around access to education pre-independence?
So there has been a lot of research in my field in economics trying to quantify the impact of events related to colonization, like apartheid, which characterized many other countries. I mean, Zimbabwe, where you come from, not to say, or Mozambique, where I have some related projects looking at the civil war and that affected Mozambique there. So we know that such policies have lasting effects, actually very persistent effects. And nowadays, actually, the part of research that I am working on is trying to understand why there is such high persistence. And a key finding, which to us was actually quite flabbergasting, was that we know actually, and we document sizable cross-country differences, but there are huge differences in the same country across regions. So for example, in Ghana, or if I was to go in the Sahel, very low levels of upward mobility in the north, relatively high upward mobility rates in the south, which linking it to the project I just mentioned earlier, it seems that educational reforms or the expansion of education, for example, in Ghana or in Nigeria, the gains have not been distributed, quote unquote, equally across space, and we have companion work looking across religious affiliation or ethnic affiliation. So I think, and going to your question, given the legacies, which are actually quite devastating, given the exploitation that Europeans did in the continent during colonization and the preceding period of colonization, actually now I think we need to understand what's the role of policies and how those policies could either lead to convergence, or as we show, which is actually quite alarming, is that in spite of the progress, there are still considerable inequalities across regions, ethnicities, and religious lines.
Now, you talked about some of the benefits of research such as this, for example, for policymakers. Are there any other, sort of like, benefits beyond policymakers? In other words, I guess my question is, what do you hope this research will achieve as a lasting impact?
Well, first, I think that this project, the way I view it, is that we need a big data approach. Let's record well what has been happening in the continent. Let's record well, or with the best available data, what are the outcomes, and try to have a more sound approach, not only to policy making, but also to businesses. So be able to inform policy in a more sound and scientific way. We see more and more of that happening in the rich club of nations. I think we need more looking on Africa and some other middle income countries. So this is the first, if you like, a big objective. Second, I think, and that's how I view myself as a researcher here, is that we can plant the seeds for a lot of subsequent research. So in our research, for example, we will not be able to address, just because we have the Pan-African perspective, we will not be able to dig into, the curriculum, if you like, what's being taught, perhaps the language of instruction, which could be quite important, subjects, etc., etc. But then researchers from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, from Guinea could jump in, or other researchers in global educational institutions, and try to shed more light on those aspects. So we view this as providing, like, the backbone for a big thing. Let's try to understand African growth, and let's try to understand education, because we know that education is the engine of growth. It's one of the key engines of growth. And moreover, it is an engine of opportunity.